And we're live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the JRoots Global Day of Testimony. Thank you for joining us from across the world. We're delighted to be sharing the voices of survivors from throughout the globe today on Yom Hashoah. If you want to see more of these sessions and interviews and testimonies, you can follow JRoots Journeys on Facebook and YouTube. I'm delighted. It's a great honor to be able to host Angela Orosz-Richt, who is with us here today live from Montreal. Angela is a very, very special lady, which you'll discover over the course of our conversation, and in particular, the circumstances of being possibly one of the youngest Holocaust survivors, and really an exceptional story of someone born in Auschwitz. So it's good to have you, Angela. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
Hi, thank you, Baruch Hashem. Great.
Fantastic. Okay, so we want to jump in and ask a few questions about some of your stories, some of your life, starting sort of even before you were born, which I think is really going to be a key to the story here. So maybe will you tell us a little bit about your parents, who they were, where they were from?
I have Hungarian parents. My mother was born in Budapest in 1919. And her family was a very educated family. Her father was an architect, and still today we can see his name on certain buildings in Budapest. And her mother was a very sophisticated lady who spoke several languages. And the children, there was two other siblings beside my mother, and they had French nannies, so they could learn French. And they spoke fluently Slovak and as kids. And then they also German, because they went to Vienna, whatever. And my mother attended in Budapest a Jewish school. It wasn't the Orthodox school. It was, they called the Neolog school. And when she finished high school, then the law came in, and Jewish students were not allowed to go further education. That was such a blow, because in that family, education was priority. So she had no choice, and she was thinking what to do, and she saw an ad, and there was a motherless family. There was a little boy, a 3-year-old boy, and the father was a lawyer, and they were looking for a nanny. And my mother answered the ad, and she got the job. That wasn't in Budapest, that was the east end of Hungary, a little town, Sarospatak. Sarospatak was a little town, but a very famous historical little city. They had a teachers' college there, and libraries back to the long time, the 1200, and it was a quiet little city, but it was highly intelligent. So my mother, through her job, met my father, who was also a lawyer. And in 1943, they got married in Sarospatak. And then they lived happily ever after, like newlyweds, and they didn't see the clouds are coming. And then it happened in 1944, March 19.
Okay, well, tell your parents' names, just so everyone.
My mother was Vera. Her name was Vera Ötvös, and my father was Dr. Bány Tibor, and he worked as a lawyer.
And if we're fast forwarding in your story to those years of that year of 1944, tell us about what happened to your parents. They're leaving home, where they ended up.
So March 19, Germany invaded Hungary, and Hungary both gone and no problem. And the first thing was, like everywhere else, let's get rid of the Jews. And it was after Pesach. Just Pesach was finished. Nobody had bread at home yet. And they knocked at the door and they said, pack up just one suitcase, what you can carry, and we're going to repatriate you, and you're going to work somewhere, and you're going to have a good life. And, like I always, when I talk to the kids, what comes to your mind to pack up? To pack up, where are we going? It's April. Should we get, it's March, basically. Should we get summer clothes, or what are we taking? Or it's still cold. What should I take? Should I take my pots? Should I take my candle lighter? What should I take with me? So it was difficult what to pack up, and they packed up a suitcase, and they ended up in Sátoraljaújhely, which is 14 kilometers from Saruspatak, and that was the ghetto. They put them in the ghetto, and in the ghetto they had a little freedom. They had a curfew, and they were able to go out. They still had friends. They were able to get some food, but it was very crowded. In one room, there was several families put in one room. So they lived in the ghetto for 6 weeks. And after the 6 weeks, they put them in the cattle cars. And then they traveled for 3 days, day and night, and they arrived to Auschwitz.
Okay, and if you can, again, the unique thing about this story is, in a sense, it's not your memory, but what your mother said. Tell us how your mother described to you when she arrived there and what happened to her upon arrival in Auschwitz.
It's, when my mother was telling me when they arrived and they opened, the door, they didn't know where they are. But the first sight was barking shepherd dogs. And it was German soldiers with rifles. And it was high, the cattle car, and they had to jump down. And if they didn't jump fast enough, and they didn't move fast enough, then they yelled at them, schnell, schnell, schnell. And my mother was always afraid the barking German shepherd. She saw a German shepherd dog, she crossed the road, because all the memories came back. When I was at the trial and Oscar Grönig and I testified, as Oscar Grönig said, when they arrived, it was ordinary. So I said, maybe from the tower up there, it was ordinary, but it was such a traumatic arrival. My mother, all her life, was afraid and came back this, because in the cattle car, they traveled together. Some of them died, and the alive one, the children, and the dead, they traveled together. They had one pail for washroom and one pail for water for 3 days for 80 people. So you can imagine when they opened the door, they didn't know where are they, what hit them. They were hungry, they were afraid, they were frightened. And Oscar Grönig said at the trial, it was ordinary.
And as your mother came off the trains into that horrific scene, she knew that she was pregnant at that point.
My mother was 3 months pregnant. And when they went at the platform, when they were arriving at the platform, then they were divided, first the man and the woman. And that was the last time my mother saw my father. So the men, they went a different way. After that, there was, at the middle was Mengele with his shiny boots and white gloves and his button. And he thought he's God, and he can decide who is going to live and who is going to die. So he pressed the woman's breast. If any liquid came out, that meant the woman was pregnant. And right away, he sent them to the crematorium, the gas chambers. And the kids, the older, he divided who is going to live and who is going to die. Over 40, they had no chance. Over 40 was old. Under 14, also they had no chance to live. So when my mother said, when when they were at the platform, it looked like men in pajamas. And these men, they were telling them, give the children to the grandmother, give the children to the grandmother. So which mother will give away the child? So they didn't know what is that. So these were prisoners before. And they knew if the mother is going to hold a child hand or hold the baby, it's automatically they're going to the gas chamber. So they wanted to save the mother. So my mother, as a naive who just only imagined good about people, gets front of Mengele, and she, hoping compassion, she says to him, I'm pregnant. So Mengele looked at her and said, you stupid goose, and waved her miraculously to the working group. My mother always called that a miracle. So after that, when they were in the working group, what was the working group? The working group was basically slow death, because don't forget, Auschwitz was an extermination camp. So nobody was supposed to get alive. So there was two kinds. There is a group who right away goes to the gas chamber, and there is the other who slow death. We starving them, we work them because Germany needed workers, and basically they were not meant to be coming out alive. Nobody was meant to come out alive. So after that, they went and they took the shower, and they were very lucky because the cold water came and not the gas. After that, they were shaved off all the hair from their body, and then they got a number. My mother got A6075. By the way, if you add it up, the geometric is life, high. But then we just find out that later. So my mother said that was the worst part. I am A6075. I am not Vera anymore. I am just a number. That was the total dehumanization. So that's the arriving. What would you like to know?
And how did she survive in Auschwitz? What was her path to survival to be able to make it to December the 21st or the 22nd of 1944, yes, which is the most important date here for you?
Okay, so my mother was a very optimistic person, and she never lost faith in Hashem. She always said, Hashem will be with me. Whatever Hashem wants me, it will be. So she was working very hard. She was put in hard work, and they were first she was in the warehouse where this Oscar Groening was in charge of it. What was the warehouse? The warehouse was, but they told them, leave everything in the train, when they arrived. And these were, what they took with them, they left it on the train, and these items, these suitcases went to the warehouse. So my mother was working in the warehouse, and they divided the linen, they divided shoes, they divided, and my mother said it was 6 foot tall. It was so much there. They called it Canada because it was so rich, like Canada in the human resources. So she always said, in Auschwitz, I was already in Canada. And then she said they changed her, and she went Barak B, and that was building roads. So with heavy equipment and the stones, and they had to build the road, and she was just not, she did it for a while, but she was not able to do it. And she went to the Blockeltester, who was a Jewish person, but charge of the Barak. And she said to her, I can't do that. I am just not able to do that. And she said to her, I am pregnant, I can't do that. But she was so, she said she knew it will end her life, but she had no other choice. She couldn't do it because otherwise she thought she's going to die when she is schlepping the stones. And the miracle to happened, and the molecular test put her a different barak. And that barak was the children's barak. And in the children's barak were Mengele's twins. He was experimenting on them. So my mother was trying to comfort them when they came out from him. And then she was working in the kitchen. And in the kitchen, she ate the raw potato peels, what she took out from the garbage. And she said that saved her life and my life, because the raw potato peels are full of nutrition. And then she said one day, Mengele called her in. They came for her, and I hope you don't have children in the room. Mengele started to experimenting on her and they gave injection in the uterus. I was there. And then when he gave the injection on the left side, the fetuses, me, moved to the opposite way. Then the day after, he gave it to the different side, and I moved again the opposite way. Who knows what were those injections? We never could find out. But the experiment was for sterilization, and she never was able to have children later on. So I want to make sure you don't have youngsters, because yesterday I had the youngsters and I skipped that part. So if you have children, let me know, because I'm not going to talk about the coming up part.
No, it's people. People know who should be watching. But so really, it was your mother together with, or being experimented on by Mengele, that like kept her relevant or useful. And then she managed to survive her way until December.
So that's why I stopped. When she was 8 months pregnant, a woman doctor who worked at Mengele's office came to the barak, and she was 8 months pregnant. And she said to her, "You're so young. It's, like if you give birth to that baby, then if Mengele is a bad mood, both of you are dead. If he is a good mood, then he will experimenting on the baby until the baby is dead. So I want to save you. You're very young. Let's have an abortion." It was most probably, my mother said, Gisela Pearl. She was a Jewish doctor from Romania, and she did abortions to save, as a positive thing, to save the mother's life. Because when babies were born, then Mengele, the sadistic animal, he did different experimenting, the baby was not allowed to eat, and he was watching and timing how long the baby is going to live without any food. And then he put a bandage on the mother's breast, make sure the mother is not feeding the baby, and sadistic things. So this Gisela Pearl wanted to save the mothers. So my mother said to her, I have to think that over. And then she said in her dream, her mother she said, come back next day. And in her dream, her mother came and she said to her, Ferushka, the baby is already 8 months old. Trust Hashem. If Hashem wants you to save the baby, he will save the baby. Don't get an abortion. So next day, this Gisela Pearl came back, and my mother said, no, I am not going to have the abortion. Whatever will happen, will happen. So somehow Mengele forgot about her. And then came December, and around December 21st, she's not so sure of the date, she felt labor pain. She had a different blocker test, and that was from Czechoslovakia, a doctor's daughter. So she knew how babies are born. So she said to her, you go up on the 3rd level, you know, there was 3 like the bunk beds, the up level, because that got the most air up level. They got the rain and the snow also, but also there was air up there. Most probably, my mother said that's why she did it. And then she said, not a word, don't cry, don't yell, nothing, not a word. And then I was born. I was very, very weak, so I didn't have energy to cry. And that saved our life, because then would have been we would have been finished. But the worst part came when 2-3 hours later, this blood clot tester came to my mother after giving birth. 2-3 hours later, told her, Vera, you have to go out. You have to go out because they're counting the appel, they called it, and they're counting the people. And if you not there, they're going to come into the barrack and they will discover you and the baby, and end of the story. So my mother went out December, freezing rain, ice, snow, and whatever you know about the winter. And she had to stand there hours, bare feet, because she had the wooden clogs only. If she falls on the ice, because the wooden clogs is no structures, then she gets shot. So therefore, to save her life, she took off the shoes and bare feet, and it was like a summer clothes, giving birth after 3 hours, and she was standing there hours. So I asked her, how did you do that? How? She said, it was like a fire in me. I have a baby. I am responsible for that baby. I want this baby to live. And she said it wasn't just the fear in her, but it was the barrack was full of rats. And she just was afraid the rats was hungry and they're going to take a bite or it ate me up. So then when she came back to the barrack after standing outside, she had milk. She always called that a big miracle. And she was able to feed me. So it went like that, you know, for 6 weeks. They didn't work anymore, but they were up twice a day. If you want to know what did they eat, it wasn't around 300 calories a day. It was a black liquid in the morning. They called it coffee, but never saw anything like coffee. And then lunch was a soup, which was sometimes at the bottom, something was swimming. And then supper was a piece of bread and sometimes a piece of margarine on it. And once my mother saw in the soup a bone. And she was so excited, a bone, you know, in the soup. And she was so happy. And the German who was supervising the distribution of the food saw her, the happiness. He went to her and he kicked her under the knee. And all her life, my mother had a black mark how he kicked her because she saw the bone. So 6 weeks it went on like that. And then in January 27, Auschwitz was liberated by the Russians, and another boy was born, George, who lives in Hungary still today. And George's mother didn't have any milk. So my mother said, okay, no problem. And she fed both of us. We're still friends on Facebook.
Amazing that she not only had the miracle of being able to sustain you, but in a place like that felt the ability and the need to sustain another miraculous child. Your story's amazing, and I think of the many people who are watching will be sort of in awe and be able to see your mother, the picture of you and your mother over your shoulder. Which is sort of an honor to be here on the screen as well. A couple of questions just as we move towards wrapping up. When did you find out about the circumstances of your birth? Because you've got a unique birth certificate that states Auschwitz as your place of birth, but how old were you? When did you start to hear, to understand?
I was very little, but in Hungary, when you go to school and you learn how to read and how to write, the first thing you have to write down, where were you born? I was not able to spell it, Auschwitz. And I was begging my mother, I said, please, let's change this. I can't write it. I can't remember. I can't write it. It's too difficult. And my mother said, oh, no. You're going to learn how to write, you're going to learn how to spell, and you're going to learn the whole story of it. So that was her explanation. I must have been 6, 7 years old. But the story of Auschwitz was always there in the house. It was always, every day, everything.
And although you and your mother miraculously survived together, your father didn't survive.
No, my father had polio when he was a child, and he was dragging one foot, which was a death sentence in Auschwitz. So he probably very early, he was murdered.
And when did you
He was 32.
learn about what happened to your birth father?
I was 12 when my mother remarried. He was also a survivor, my stepfather, and they met in Auschwitz. When Auschwitz was liberated, the men went to the women's barracks and they were looking for their family. So he went to the barrack and he learned his wife and his daughter was murdered. The daughter was 12 years old, so she wasn't 14. They right away went, to the gas chambers as arriving. So he brought food to my mother, because the next question was, when they didn't find their family, who is from the same town where I am from? So they said, there is a woman here with a baby. So he went to my mother, gave some food, and he said to my mother, this baby needs a birth certificate. My mother said, birth certificate? This baby's dying. What do I care about papers and birth certificate? I want this baby to live. I don't care about papers. But he went into Auschwitz and he got me a birth certificate. So based on that Polish birth certificate, the Hungarians issued one, and it says everywhere the name, Auschwitz. But this is how I had to learn how to spell Auschwitz.
But to learn that your mother remarried, and then you grew up with a stepfather.
I grew up with my stepfather. I had no idea. I was very little, and he was everything, not the discipline. He lost his daughter, so he wanted to give that, I believe, that love for me. And my mother was trying to be discipline me, but he just spoiled me rotten. And I really didn't know the stepfather. He didn't want, it's a stigma in Hungary, a step parent. And he didn't want, I told my mother, he doesn't want to be a stepfather. He wants to be like a father. So when I was 12, I was sent to buy some groceries. And when I was paying, then the cashier said to me, why do you like Polgar? He's not your father. I said, what are you talking about? He says, your father is dead. This is not your father. I still remember I just dropped everything and ran home screaming my head off. And I said, 11 and a half. And I said, what is she telling me? What is it? What's going on here? So they sat me down and they explained me everything. And I loved him more. I even loved him more, than before. I was crazy. There was, like, you don't want to do homework? Okay, darling, you don't have to do homework. And he told the teacher, oh, we didn't have time. It was my mother. She was, what is this? Like, of course she has to do homework. So this is how it went, but with lots of love. I grew up with lots of love.
Okay. And just last couple of questions, if that's okay. one of the youngest Holocaust survivors, without a doubt. And we're on a sort of the cusp of a different generation when there's, unfortunately, with coronavirus and everything, and less people to tell the story. And thank God you're phenomenally strong and energetic here with us. How do you feel about that responsibility of being one of the youngest, one of the last remaining people to be able to tell this story?
You know, Zach, I always feel I was left by Hashem, by God. I left alive, but I have a responsibility. And that responsibility is to tell the story, to tell what happened. And I truly believe, you know, to fight anti-Semitism in this world is to educate the people. And the education is about the Holocaust, to tell them what happened, what we went through, what was it. If they understand this hate, the word hate will be changed for love, and the whole world will be different. And I always believe one people can make a difference. I believe in that. One people could make a difference. You know, look at Winston, how many children? Look at Schindler. There are people, you know, who went and they tried their best, and they showed us one person can make a difference. And I want to make a difference.
I think that you've been exceptional in making a difference, and the world has recognized it. There's one, I know you had a meeting with a very significant person that the Pope invited you to come and meet him, to come and tell your story. I just wanted if you wanted to tell us about the deal that you made with the Pope.
Yeah, my deal with the Pope, and I'm keeping it. I don't know if he knows I'm keeping it, but I'm keeping it. Yes, he came to Auschwitz. The Pope came to Auschwitz, and we had a private audience with him. And he asked me, please pray for me. He knew the story, let me tell you. He knew the story. That's why I got the private audience. And I took a picture of my mother and me as a present for him. And he said to me, pray for me. So I said to him, okay, let's make a deal. I pray for you until you promised me you're going to fight anti-Semitism and you're going to be friend of Israel. If you promise every Friday night, when we Orthodox women, we light candles, Hashem, God is listening. So if I will pray for your health, then Hashem will listen, but you have to do your part. And he said, he will. So every Friday night, you know, that was 16, I think it was 2016 it happened. Every Friday night, I pray for his health because he is a friend of the Jewish people and he's friend of Israel. So he keeps his, I keep mine.
Amazing, amazing. Okay, as we wrap up, I just want to give you the floor of like a final message to all of the people watching on Yom Hashoah, what you want to
I want to read something. As a final message, I want to read, I could tell, but it doesn't come out so good. I have to read that to you. This one is Howard Schultz. Howard Schultz is the owner of Starbucks. Howard Schultz famously related the following story. When I was in Israel, I went to Meir Shearim. Along with the group of other businessmen, I had an audience with Rabbi Nosson Tzvi Finkel, head of the Mirror Yeshiva. I never heard of him, and I didn't know anything about him. We went into his study and waited 10 or 15 minutes until finally the door opened. What we hadn't known was that Rabbi Finkel was severely afflicted with Parkinson's disease. He sat down at the head of the table, and naturally our inclination was to look away. We didn't want to embarrass him. Who can tell me what the lesson of the Holocaust is? He asked us. We were all looking away when we heard this big bang on the table. Gentlemen, look at me, and look at me right now. His speech affliction was even worse than his shaking. It was really hard to watch him. I have only a few minutes for you because I know you are all busy American businessmen. You know, just a little dig. Then he asked us again, who can tell me the lesson of the Holocaust? He called on one guy who didn't know what to do. It was like being called on the 5th grade and not having the answer. The guy started to say something beginning like, we will never ever forget. But the rabbi dismissed him completely. I felt terrible for him until I realized that the rabbi was getting ready to call on someone else. All of us were sort of under the table, looking away, you know, thinking, please, please, not me. I was sweating, but he didn't call on me. He called another guy who had a fantastic answer. We will never, ever again be victims of bystanders. Rabbi Finkel replied, you guys, you just don't get it. Okay, gentlemen, let me tell you the essence of the human spirit. As you know, during the Holocaust, people were transported in the most inhuman way in rail cars. They thought they were going to work camps. We all know that they were going to death camps. After hours and hours in this inhuman corral with no light, no bathrooms, in the freezing cold, they arrived at the camps. The doors were swung wide open and they were blinded by the light. Men were separated from women, mothers from daughters, fathers from sons. Then they went off the barracks to sleep with only one person in 6 given a blanket. The person who received the blanket had to decide, am I going to share that blanket with the 5 other people who didn't get one? Or am I going to use it myself to save myself? It was during this defining moment that we learned the power of the human spirit because we shared the blanket with 5 others. And with that, he stood up and said, take your blankets back to America and share them with 5 other people. So this is my message. Share the Holocaust stories. Go back to your school, go back to your friends, and share what you learned about the Holocaust.
Angela, thank you so much for spending the time with us. And thank you to everyone who's been watching the Global Day of Testimony. We're delighted to be able to share the voices of the survivors to everyone at home. If you want to tune into more of the sessions, you can tune in at the JRoots Facebook page or YouTube page following JRoots journey. So thank you very much, and thank you to Angela.
I thank you the opportunity to tell my mother's story.
Thank you.